Chapter 1. Amber Light. The elevator gave a groan like a dying man, a sound of metal surrendering to physics. It shuddered, dropped 6 inches with a sickening lurch that sent Mira's stomach into her throat, and then stopped. Dead. The lights flickered once, twice, then settled into a dim, buzzing emergency amber. For a full 3 seconds, there was only the hum of the backup power and the sound of Mira's own breathing. She looked up at the floor indicator. Unlit. She pressed the door open button. Nothing. She pressed the alarm bell. A flat, non-committal buzz echoed in the small space, a sound that promised absolutely no urgency from anyone who might hear it.
"Well," she said to the silence, "this is just peachy."
A voice from the corner of the elevator, a voice so low and resonant it seemed to vibrate in the floor, spoke. "This is suboptimal." Mira jumped. She had completely forgotten she wasn't alone. In the sudden dimness, she'd registered another passenger only as a tall, dark shape. Now, her eyes adjusting, she saw him. He was tall, impossibly so, dressed in a black coat so exquisitely tailored it probably had its own credit rating. His face was all sharp angles and pale, perfect skin, his dark hair swept back as if by a dramatic wind that had failed to follow him into the elevator. He looked, she thought, like the final boss of a European perfume ad. He was staring at the unlit floor panel with an expression of profound, personal betrayal. It wasn't the look of a man who was inconvenienced. It was the look of a king whose chariot had just thrown a wheel. "Suboptimal," Mira repeated, a laugh bubbling in her chest. "Yeah, you could say that. My money's on a busted drive sheave, but it could just be the controller board. This thing's been making that grinding noise for weeks." She gave the wall a friendly pat. Poor old girl was bound to give up the ghost eventually. The man turned his gaze from the panel to her. His eyes were dark, and for a moment, they seemed to hold a strange, luminous depth, like looking down a well at night. "You are remarkably sanguine about our predicament. Years of living in buildings with charming pre-war details, which is landlord speak for everything is broken. You learn to roll with it." She slid down the mirrored wall, wincing as her jeans snagged on a loose bit of trim, and sat on the floor. She pulled out her phone. No signal. Of course. She tossed it into her lap. "So, looks like we're getting to know each other." He remained standing, perfectly still, a marble statue of disapproval. His posture was so unnervingly perfect it made Mira's spine ache in sympathy. Cassian, vampire king of the eastern seaboard and lord of the tri-state shadow courts, was having a genuinely terrible evening. The conclave of whispering elders, a tri-centennial gathering to address the allocation of feeding territories and adjudicate a blood feud that had been simmering since the fall of the Byzantine Empire, was scheduled to begin at the stroke of 11. His absence was not just a breach of protocol. It was a political statement, a sign of weakness his rivals would dissect for decades. And now, the universe, which he had outlived, outwitted, and outmaneuvered for 8 centuries, had trapped him in a metal box with a stranger. He had seen her before, of course, in the lobby, on the street. She was hard to miss, not because of her appearance, which was ordinary in the way that sunlight was ordinary, everywhere and easy to forget until it was gone, but because of her energy. She moved through the world as if it were hers, as if it wanted her there. He had noticed her the way one notices a warm room after walking through cold, involuntarily and with an irritation at the noticing. But he had never spoken to her, had never intended to. Mortals were ephemeral. They were background noise in the long symphony of his existence. There was no point. And yet, here he was, trapped, by a mechanical failure he could not bribe, intimidate, or execute. "This is fine," he said. The words were tight, clipped. He wasn't speaking to her. He was issuing a command to the universe, one that was being rudely ignored. Mira's internal monologue kicked into high gear. "Okay, buddy, you keep telling yourself that. You look like you're about to have a full-body aneurysm over a 10-minute delay." Deep breaths. Or don't. You do you. Aloud, she said, "You look like you're dying." The statement hung in the air, blunt and unexpected. His composure cracked. Just a little. A flicker of something, surprise, outrage, crossed his features before being ruthlessly suppressed. "I might be," he said, his voice a low murmur. The admission was so quiet, so toneless, it was more chilling than a shout. Mira blinked. He really did look unwell. His pallor wasn't just guy who doesn't see the sun, it was guy who is actively feuding with the sun and losing badly. "Stress is a killer," she said brightly, deciding to treat the situation like he was just a normal, socially awkward dude having a panic attack. She dug into her oversized tote bag, past a dog-eared paperback, a half-empty water bottle, and a startling number of loose pens. "Want a gummy bear? Sugar helps. Or maybe that's for shock. Either way, they're delicious." She held out a crumpled plastic bag filled with brightly colored, bear-shaped blobs. The scent of artificial fruit, cherry, lime, and a mystery orange filled the small space. He had not been offered a gummy bear in his 832 years of existence. He had been offered fealty, blood, kingdoms, the lives of his enemies, and, on one memorable occasion in 1788, a particularly fine gilt harpsichord. But never this. A small gelatinous effigy of a woodland creature reeking of sucrose and red dye number 40. His first instinct was revulsion. Food was anathema, a foul matter his body would violently reject. His second instinct, following swiftly on the heels of the first, was a strange, unprecedented flicker of something else. Not curiosity, the sheer, unvarnished sincerity of the gesture. This small, mortal woman, trapped in a metal box with a creature who could snap her neck before she could draw a breath, was offering him candy, as if he were a fussy child, as if they were friends. "No," he said. The word came out harsher than he intended. "Thank you." He added the courtesy an instant too late, a clunky architectural addition to a sentence that was already complete. Mira just shrugged, undeterred. "More for me." She popped a red one into her mouth. "So, what were you in such a hurry for? Big meeting? Hot date?" "A prior engagement," he said, the phrase sounding utterly inadequate. "Ah," Mira chewed thoughtfully. "Well, they'll wait. Or they won't. Nothing you can do about it from in here." She patted the floor next to her. "You can sit down, you know. They don't charge extra for it." He considered the floor. It was the floor, a surface trod upon by countless strangers, unclean, beneath him. And yet, the thought of standing here, rigid with fury, for the next hour while this woman chirped at him from below seemed infinitely worse. With a sigh that felt like it dislodged dust from the 13th century, he lowered himself to the floor, folding his long limbs with a stiff, unnatural grace. He did not lean against the wall. He sat bolt upright, his back a perfect 90-degree angle to the ground. "There," Mira said, as if praising a dog for a new trick. "See? Comfy." It was not comfy. It was humiliating. An hour passed, then another. Mira, it turned out, was a talker. She didn't seem to require much or any encouragement. She told him about her job as an architectural historian, restoring the facades of old brownstones. "It's like being a detective," she explained, her hands sketching shapes in the air. "You peel back layers of bad renovations and cheap paint, and you find this beautiful original detail that nobody's seen in 100 years. You get to bring it back to life." Cassian found himself listening, truly listening. He, who had watched buildings rise and fall like tides, who had personally commissioned architects who were now just footnotes in history books, found her small, passionate talk about brick-pointing techniques mesmerizing. It was the finitude of it that struck him. She spoke of 100 years as if it were a vast, unknowable chasm of time. To him, it was a long weekend. Then she moved on to her ex-boyfriend, a man named Chad. Chad, she said, shaking her head with the fond exasperation one reserves for a particularly stupid pet, was a human fedora. His entire personality was craft beer and thinking he would have been friends with Hemingway. He once tried to explain my own job to me at a party. He called it building cosmetology. Cassian processed this. He had known tyrants, warlords, and popes. He had personally beheaded a man who tried to usurp his territory in Bavaria. He had seen the worst of humanity. And yet this Chad sounded uniquely, profoundly irritating. This Chad, Cassian heard himself say, the words emerging from some long-dormant part of his brain that wasn't occupied with strategy or dominion. He sounds like a minor princeling from a failed Germanic tribe, all arrogance and no land. Mira stared at him. Then she burst out laughing, a real, unrestrained peal of laughter that bounced off the metal walls. Oh my God, that's exactly it. A minor princeling. I'm stealing that. Something in Cassian's chest, a space that had been cold and still for 400 years, felt a faint, unfamiliar warmth. He had made her laugh. He hadn't been trying to be funny. He never tried to be funny. And yet. The conversation shifted. She started asking him questions. So what about you? You're not from around here, are you? You have that accent, like you learned English from a very old, very angry book. I have traveled, he said, which was the understatement of several consecutive lifetimes. Do you like it, the city? It is loud, he said. That's the best part, she countered. All the noise, all the people, you can be completely anonymous. Just one of 8 million stories all bumping into each other. One finds the centuries blur, he said, the words slipping out, a crack in the dam of his composure. The faces change, but the patterns remain. Ambition, betrayal, folly. It grows repetitive. He hadn't meant to say it. It was a confession of a weariness so profound it was almost a physical weight. A weariness he had never, not once, spoken of. Mira fell silent. She wasn't chewing her gummy bears anymore. She was just looking at him, her head tilted, her bright, intelligent eyes seeing more than he was comfortable with. The dim amber light softened the lines of her face, and for a moment she looked less like a modern woman and more like a figure from a Vermeer painting, imbued with a quiet, knowing light. "You've never told anyone that, have you?" she asked softly. The question hit him with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple, gentle observation, but it laid him bare. The loneliness he carried like a shroud, the crushing ennui of endless, sleepless nights piling one on top of the other for eternity. She saw it. A stranger in an elevator saw the truth of him more clearly than anyone in his entire, long existence. He couldn't speak. He could only stare back at her, the king stripped of his crown, the predator revealed as a prisoner. "I've never had anyone ask," he finally managed, his voice rough. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with a shared, startling vulnerability. A sudden, loud clanging from above shattered the moment. A gruff voice echoed down the shaft. "Hello? Anyone in there?" Mira scrambled to her feet. "Yes, we're here. We're okay." "All right, hang tight. Got the brake engaged. Gonna get you moving in a jiffy." The elevator lurched upwards. The lights flickered back to a normal, harsh white. The spell was broken. Cassian felt a pang of something so sharp it was almost painful. He didn't want to leave. He wanted to stay here, in the dim amber light, in this strange confessional booth, with the scent of artificial cherry and the one person who had ever thought to ask if he was lonely. The doors slid open with a cheerful ding. He walked with Mira down the hall to her apartment, number 7B. The silence between them was awkward now, the easy intimacy of the elevator gone. She stopped at her door, fumbling for her keys. "Well," she said, not looking at him, "that was an adventure." Indeed. She found her keys and unlocked the door, then paused, her hand on the knob. She turned back to him, a small, hesitant smile on her face. She scribbled something on the back of a grocery receipt from her pocket. "Here," she said, pressing the small slip of paper into his hand. His fingers, cold as stone, brushed against hers, warm and alive. The contact was like a jolt of electricity. "My number, you know, in case of future elevator emergencies." He looked down at the paper, a series of numbers, written in a looping, hurried script. A lifeline. "I will keep that in mind," he said. She gave him one last look, a look that held a dozen unspoken questions, and then disappeared into her apartment. Cassian stood alone in the hallway, the conclave forgotten. He stared at the flimsy piece of paper as if it were the most precious artifact in the world. And then he folded it, placed it in his breast pocket, and walked away. He did not call. He could not call. She was mortal. He was a secret measured in centuries. To pursue her was to risk everything his kind had built, their anonymity, their safety, the delicate architecture of a hidden world. One curious human with a warm smile and too many questions was exactly the kind of danger that ended kingdoms. He walked away, and the number burned against his chest like a brand. Chapter 2. Vinyl Siding. The next weeks were a particular kind of torture. He saw her. That was the cruelty of it. They lived in the same building, a fact that had previously been inconsequential and was now a daily exercise in self-control. He saw her in the lobby, wrestling with a stack of blueprint tubes. He saw her on the street, laughing into her phone, her scarf trailing behind her. He saw her in the elevator, the new, functioning one, and they would ride together in silence, 2, 3, 4 floors, the air between them thick with the memory of amber light and gummy bears. She always smiled at him, a warm, open smile that expected nothing and offered everything. "Hey, elevator buddy," she'd say, or, "Still alive? No more suboptimal events?" And he would offer something in return, a nod, a near smile, a stilted good evening. And then he would retreat to his penthouse and stand at his window and stare at the city and feel like the world's oldest, most pathetic fool. He couldn't call her. He couldn't pursue this. The laws of his kind were absolute. No mortal could know of their existence. The penalty was not gentle. It was not a warning. It was erasure of the mortal, and sometimes of the vampire foolish enough to allow the breach. The conclave enforced this with the cold efficiency of an institution that had been perfecting its cruelty for millennia. Alistair noticed. "You are pacing, my king," Alistair observed one evening, standing in the doorway of the library with a glass of warmed blood on a silver tray. "You have been pacing for 3 nights. The Aubusson carpet is beginning to show a migratory trail." "I am not pacing, I am thinking." "You are thinking in a straight line, repeatedly, across a priceless 17th century textile. That is pacing." Cassian stopped. He looked at the carpet. There was, indeed, a faint track. "I have a situation." Alistair set down the tray. "A situation? Is this a political situation? A territorial dispute? An assassination attempt? I have protocols for all of these." "It is a person." Alistair's eyebrows rose by precisely 1 millimeter, which, for him, was the equivalent of falling to his knees in shock. "A person? What manner of person?" "A mortal." The 2nd millimeter. "A mortal person. My king, when you say situation, do you mean this mortal is a threat? A witness? A complication requiring disposal?" "No, Cassian said, too quickly. She is not a threat. She offered me a gummy bear. Alistair stared at him for a very long time. Then he picked up the glass of blood from the tray and drank it himself. I see, he said, in the tone of a man who did not see at all, but was bracing for impact. The problem was not that Cassian wanted her. Desire was a thing he understood. It was old, simple, easily managed. The problem was that he wanted to talk to her. He wanted to sit on a dirty floor and listen to her talk about brick pointing and terrible ex-boyfriends. He wanted to hear her laugh again, that bright, unrehearsed sound. He wanted to tell her things he had never told anyone, things about the weight of centuries, the color of a sky he remembered from before this city existed, the taste of figs in a Tuscan grove that was now a parking lot. He wanted to be known, and that was the most dangerous desire of all. So he did nothing. He maintained his distance. He sat in his throne room and listened to Serafina's latest political maneuvering and the Duke's territorial complaints, and he thought about gummy bears. Mira, for her part, had noticed the handsome, weird man from the elevator had gone silent. She wasn't heartbroken about it. She barely knew him. But she was puzzled. The conversation in the elevator had felt real. Not small talk real. Real. The kind of conversation where someone accidentally tells you the truest thing about themselves and then looks startled that it came out. Maybe he's just like that, she told her friend Priya over drinks. Maybe he's one of those people who are only vulnerable during emergencies. Like, the elevator was his emotional decompression chamber, and now he's repressurized. Or, Priya said, he's married. He's not married. How do you know? He had a conversation with a stranger for 3 hours and told her he was lonely. Married people don't do that. Married people talk about their kids' school schedules. Fair point. So call him. I gave him my number. If he wanted to call, he would. That was the thing. She had made the move. She had offered. The ball was in his court, and he had apparently let it roll into a corner and die there. She let it go. She had her work, her projects, her life. A strange man in an elevator was a good story, not a storyline. Except she kept thinking about what he'd said. One finds the centuries blur. Who talks like that? It wasn't an affectation. It was the cadence of someone who actually thought in those terms. Long arcs, repeating patterns, the weight of time measured not in years, but in something larger and sadder. She'd spent her career peeling back layers of history in buildings, finding the original beneath the renovation. She recognized old things, and something about him was very, very old. She filed it away, and every time she saw him in the lobby, she smiled, because it cost her nothing and because the look on his face when she did, that fractional softening, that almost warmth quickly suppressed, suggested he needed it more than he would ever say. The dam broke on a Tuesday. Because the universe, Cassian had long observed, had a fondness for mundane timing. She was in the lobby, struggling with a massive rolled blueprint that kept unrolling as she tried to fit it into a cardboard tube. The blueprint was winning. She was muttering to herself, her hair falling into her face, and the blueprint was slowly, inexorably unfurling across the marble floor of the lobby like a conquering army. He was passing through on his way to a meeting. He could have walked past. He should have walked past. He stopped. "May I assist?" She looked up, surprised. "Oh, hey, elevator buddy." She blew a strand of hair out of her eyes. "If you can hold that end, I can roll from here." He held the end. His hands were steady. Hers were not. The blueprint was of a 19th century facade, and even upside down, he could read the architect's notations. He recognized the hand. "Renwick," he said. She looked up sharply. "You know James Renwick?" "I know his work." He caught himself. "His facades are distinctive." That's one word for it. I'm restoring a brownstone he designed on the Upper East Side. The owner covered the original terracotta with vinyl siding in the 80s. Vinyl siding. Over Renwick. It's a crime against architecture. A crime against taste, certainly. She smiled. And that was it. The line was crossed. Not with a grand gesture or a declaration, but with a rolled-up blueprint and a shared opinion about vinyl siding. After that, they talked. In the lobby, in the hallway, in the elevator. Brief conversations at first, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, the length of a ride from the ground floor to 7. The conversations grew longer. They fell into a pattern, an orbit, 2 bodies drawn together by a gravity neither had agreed to. Cassian was careful, so careful. He never ate in front of her, he never stood in direct sunlight. He kept his movements human slow, his reactions human delayed, his strength hidden behind a careful performance of ordinariness. The performance was exhausting. But with her, the pretense was worth it, because with her, for the first time in centuries, he felt present, in the moment. The way she talked about the present, this day, this hour, this specific quality of afternoon light on a brownstone's cornice, made the present feel like enough. And she invited him for coffee at her apartment one evening. "Fair warning," she said, unlocking her door. "The place is small and I haven't cleaned, and there's a good chance my cat will judge you." He stepped through the threshold. She had invited him. The old law was satisfied. He felt the barrier dissolve and entered her space. Small, warm, cluttered with books and blueprints and a ginger cat that regarded him from the top of a bookshelf with the contempt of a creature that recognized a predator and was not remotely impressed. "That's Mr. Whiskers," Mira said. "He hates everyone. Don't take it personally." "I will endeavor not to." She made coffee. He held the mug she handed him, letting the warmth seep into his cold hands, and did not drink. She drank hers in great, grateful gulps, and talked about her latest project, and he listened, and the evening light came in through the window and painted her in gold, and he thought, "I am in terrible, terrible trouble." He was falling in love. He recognized the symptoms from literature, because he had certainly never experienced them firsthand. The quickening of attention when she entered a room, the way her voice became the only sound that mattered in any space, the absurd, undignified desire to make her laugh, to be the cause of that particular brightness in her face. It was happening to her, too. He could see it. The way she found reasons to touch him, a hand on his arm, a playful shove to his shoulder, a nudge with her knee. She always pulled back afterward, a flicker of confusion on her face, as if she'd just touched something unexpectedly cold and was trying to decide if she'd imagined it. She hadn't imagined it. His skin was cold. Always cold. The temperature of a room that has been empty for too long. Chapter 3. The Performance. The evening she cooked for him was the crisis. "I made pasta," she announced, setting a plate in front of him. "It's my grandmother's recipe, which means it has 6 cloves of garlic and no mercy. Sit. Eat." The garlic was, he noted with academic interest, not actually a problem. That was a myth, propagated by a disgruntled human in the 15th century, whom a vampire had insulted at a dinner party. The man had written a pamphlet. It had gone viral by 15th century standards. The real problem was that he could not eat. At all. "I am not hungry," he said. "You're never hungry." She sat down across from him, her expression light but her eyes sharp. "In all the time I've known you, I have never once seen you eat anything. Or drink anything. You hold a coffee mug like a prop." "I have a sensitive constitution." "Cassian," she put down her fork, "I'm not stupid, and I'm not blind. You don't eat. You don't drink. Your hands are always freezing. You never come out during the day. You flinch when sunlight hits you. And you talk about the 1800s like you were there." She paused, and he watched the gears turning behind her eyes. The architectural historian, the detective of brick, analyzing the evidence. "I have been very careful," he said, which was a confession in itself. "You've been careful about the big stuff," she said, "but the small stuff gives you away. People always forget the small stuff." She looked at him across the untouched plate of pasta. "So, what are you?" The silence stretched between them, a bridge over an abyss. Cassian could hear her heartbeat, strong, steady, elevated. Not fear, anticipation. She was bracing for the answer, but she was not afraid. Not yet. He had 1,000 evasions, 100 half-truths. But looking into her clear, direct gaze, all of them felt like cowardice. She had earned this. "I am a vampire," he said. Mira didn't scream. She didn't run. She sat very still, her fork halfway to her plate, and studied his face with an expression he couldn't read. "A vampire," she repeated. "Yes. Like bats, coffins, Transylvania." No bats, no coffins. The Transylvania Association is a gross oversimplification of a complex political situation. She exhaled, a long, slow breath. "How old are you?" 832. 800 and... She stopped. She pressed her fingers to her temples. Okay. 832 years old, and you live in apartment 12A, in a building with a broken elevator. The elevator is functional now. That is not the point, Cassian. He watched her process it. He had expected horror. He had expected flight. What he saw instead was something worse. Hurt. "How long?" she asked quietly. "How long? How long have you been lying to me?" Her voice was steady, but there was a crack in it, a hairline fracture running through the warmth. "All those conversations, all those evenings. You were sitting in my apartment, holding a mug you couldn't drink from, pretending to be something you're not. How long have you been performing?" The word landed like a blade. Performing. "From the beginning," he said, because she deserved honesty now, even when it destroyed him. "Every moment. I cannot eat, I cannot drink, I cannot stand in your sunlight. I am not what you thought I was." "No," she said, and her voice was hard now, the warmth gone. "You're not. You're a stranger. I've been spending months with someone who doesn't exist. The man who sat on the elevator floor and told me he was lonely, was that real? Or was that a performance too?" "That was real," he said, and his voice broke on the word. "That was the most real thing I have said in 400 years. "Then why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me?" "Because telling you would endanger you. My kind has laws. No mortal can know of our existence. The penalty is..." "So this was always going to end," she cut in. "You knew that, from the start. You knew this couldn't go anywhere, and you let me fall anyway." He had no defense. She was right. Mira stood up. She picked up his untouched plate and carried it to the kitchen. She scraped the pasta into the trash with deliberate, controlled movements. When she turned back to him, her face was composed, but her hands were shaking. "I think you should go," she said. "Mira, I need to think, and I can't do that with an 800-year-old vampire sitting in my kitchen looking like a sad museum exhibit." She walked to the door and opened it. "Please." He stood. He walked to the door. Every step felt like wading through concrete. At the threshold, he paused. "I am sorry," he said, "for the deception, not for the rest." "The rest is the problem, Cassian." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "The rest is what makes the deception hurt." She closed the door. The lock clicked. The sound was very small, and very final. He stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the number on her door. 7B. Then he turned and walked to the elevator. The elevator that had started all of this, with its groaning cables and its amber light and the scent of artificial cherry. The first night was the worst. Mira sat on her couch in the dark, Mr. Whiskers curled in her lap, and replayed every conversation she'd ever had with Cassian. Every moment, every word. She went through them the way she went through a building's history, layer by layer, peeling back the surface to find what was underneath. The cold hands, the untouched coffee, the way he angled away from the window when the sun hit. The evening he'd caught a falling book before she'd even registered it was tipping, a movement so fast it had looked like a magic trick. She'd laughed. He'd looked terrified. It was all there. Every clue, every tell, every moment she'd filed under eccentric or quirky was evidence. And she, the detective of Brick, had missed it. Or, and this was the part that made her chest ache, she hadn't missed it. She'd chosen not to see it, because seeing it would have meant losing him. "I'm an idiot, Mr. Whiskers," she said. Mr. Whiskers purred. He was not a therapist, but he was warm and present, which was more than she could say for some therapists she'd tried. The second night, she cried. Not the pretty, cinematic kind of crying, the ugly kind, with hiccups and a runny nose, and the realization that she'd been in love with someone who wasn't even the same species, and that the stupidest part wasn't that he was a vampire. The stupidest part was that she missed him anyway. She missed his ridiculous formality. She missed the way he said "indeed" as if the word had a period at both ends. She missed the way he listened, actually listened. She missed the accidental humor, the flash of bewilderment when something in her world didn't match his vast, ancient frame of reference. She missed the warmth in his voice when he forgot to be cold. She missed the man in the elevator who had told her the truest thing about himself without meaning to. That man was real. The lying, the hiding, the performance, those were the renovation. Underneath was the original, and it was beautiful. And she was furious that he hadn't trusted her enough to show it to her willingly. The third night, she started getting angry, and the anger was better. The anger had structure. Cassian's penthouse was a mausoleum. He sat in his library, surrounded by 8 centuries of accumulated everything, and he felt the specific, excruciating weight of each year. The books on the shelves were old friends who had nothing new to say. The city outside his window glittered, indifferent, a billion lights, none of which were hers. Alistair brought him blood. He didn't drink it. Alistair brought him reports from the court. He didn't read them. Alistair brought him the agenda for the upcoming council session. He set it on fire. Accidentally. With a candle. The candle was for ambiance. The ambiance was misery. "You are not well," Alistair observed. "I am fine. You set the council agenda on fire. It was a substandard agenda. It was the same format we have used for 3 centuries. Cassian stared at the charred remains of the document. "Then perhaps 3 centuries of the same format is the problem, Alistair." Alistair sat down, uninvited, in the chair opposite the desk. This was, in 500 years of service, something he had done perhaps a dozen times. It was the Alistair equivalent of grabbing Cassian by the shoulders and shaking him. "Tell me," Alistair said simply. So Cassian told him. All of it. Alistair listened in silence. When Cassian finished, the retainer was quiet for a long moment. "She is angry because you lied," Alistair said, "not because of what you are." The distinction seems academic. It is the only distinction that matters, my king. She did not run when you told her the truth. She ran because you waited too long to tell it. Those are very different things. "I cannot go to her. She asked me to leave." "She asked you to leave so she could think. Thinking is not a permanent state, even for mortals. It implies a conclusion will be reached. And if the conclusion is that she wants nothing to do with me? Alistair stood up and straightened his waistcoat. Then, my king, you will have the rest of eternity to remember what it felt like to be known by someone worth knowing. Which, I should point out, you did not have before. He collected the charred agenda and left. Cassian sat in the dark and thought about what it had felt like to be known. The days passed. They did not see each other. Mira adjusted her schedule to avoid the lobby during the hours she knew he'd be passing through. He adjusted his to avoid hers. They were two people in the same building, performing an elaborate choreography of avoidance, each feeling the other's absence like a missing tooth. Mira threw herself into work. She had a brownstone on the Upper West Side with original cast iron details buried under decades of paint. She spent her days on scaffolding, carefully stripping layers, and the metaphor was so painfully on the nose she wanted to scream. Cassian attended the court. He sat on his throne and listened to the endless petitions and disputes, and everything sounded like white noise. The games of his court now felt like what they were: a very old, very elaborate way of avoiding the fact that none of them were alive. One night, standing on his balcony, he heard her laugh. Far below, through an open window, the sound drifted up. She was on the phone, laughing at something someone said. The sound was faint, nearly lost in the noise of the city, but he heard it as clearly as if she were standing beside him. His hearing was inhuman. It had been a gift once. Now it was an instrument of torture, because he could hear her living her life 7 floors below, and he could not be part of it. He gripped the balcony railing. The iron bent under his hands. He didn't notice. Chapter 4. Use the door. He here came quietly, the way real danger always does. Cassian's enemies were not dramatic. The Western faction, a brutal expansionist clan, did not announce their intentions with scrolls or theatrical challenges. They gathered intelligence. They watched patterns. They found vulnerabilities. And they found Mira. Not because they knew she was important to Cassian, not at first. They found her because she was immortal, living in a building that housed the king of the eastern seaboard, and mortals in proximity to power were either assets or liabilities, and both were useful. Cassian sensed it first as a wrongness in the city's nocturnal energy, a scent that shouldn't be there, acrid, foreign, carrying the signature of a bloodline he recognized. It was near her building. It was near her floor. The realization hit him like a physical blow. They had been watching the building. They had been cataloging the residents. And a mortal woman who came and went at predictable hours, who had no security, no protection, no awareness of the world that existed in the shadows around her. She was the softest target they could imagine. He moved. Not through the elevator, not through the lobby. He went through the window of his penthouse, 500 feet above the street, and he fell like a stone and landed like a whisper. Then he ran. The city became a blur, a streak of lights. 2 vampires, young, aggressive, positioned in the alley beside the building's service entrance. They hadn't gone in yet. They were waiting. Watching her apartment window, where a warm light was on. She was home. She was 300 feet from 2 creatures who viewed her as an object lesson. Cassian did not announce himself. He did not posture. He did not deliver threats. He appeared between them and the building like a wall of ancient, focused rage, and what happened next was very fast and very efficient, and not something that would be spoken of in polite company. When it was done, he stood in the alley, his coat ruined, his breathing unnecessary but ragged anyway, a phantom reflex from a body that remembered being human. The 2 vampires were gone. Alive, but relocated, with a message carved into their memory that would take decades to forget. He looked up at her window. The light was still on. She was safe. He was wrong. She already knew. Mira opened her window and looked down into the alley. She couldn't see much, just the dark, the shape of the dumpster, the faint glint of something on the ground that might have been metal. But she had heard something, a sound like a crack of thunder, muffled and close. And then silence, the specific, weighted silence that follows violence. And then she saw him, standing in the alley, looking up at her. His coat was torn. His eyes caught the streetlight and reflected it, briefly, like a cat's eyes in headlights. Not human, not even close. Their eyes met across 7 stories of empty air. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood there, and the look on his face, the raw, desperate fear on a face she had never seen express anything so uncontrolled, told her everything. Something had come for her, and he had stopped it. She closed the window. She sat down on her couch. Mr. Whiskers jumped into her lap, and she thought, very carefully, about what it meant that an 800-year-old vampire who she had kicked out of her apartment was standing guard in her alley at 2 a.m, covered in the evidence of whatever he'd just done, looking up at her window with an expression she could only describe as terrified. Not terrified of what he'd done, terrified of losing her. She picked up her phone. She scrolled to his number, the one he'd finally given her weeks ago, the one she hadn't deleted despite everything. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She pressed it. 1 ring. He picked up instantly. She could hear the night air on his end, the faint hum of the city. "Are you hurt?" she asked. A pause. "No." "Are the things that were in my alley going to come back?" Another pause. Longer. "No." "Were they here because of you?" The longest pause of all. She could hear him breathing, or rather, she could hear him remembering to breathe, the way he sometimes did when he was trying to seem human. "Yes," he said. "Come upstairs," she said. "Use the door this time." She opened the door before he knocked. He stood in the hallway, his coat ruined, a scratch along his jaw that was already healing. She watched the skin close over itself in real time, like a time-lapse of something impossible. "You're healing," she said. "Yes." "In front of me, right now. Your face is doing a thing." He touched his jaw. The scratch was gone. "I apologize. I forgot to conceal." "Don't." Her voice was sharp. "Don't conceal anything. Not anymore. That's the whole point." She stepped back and let him in. He entered her apartment the way one enters a church, slowly, reverently, aware that the space was sacred and that he was there on borrowed grace. She sat on the couch. He stood. Of course he stood. She pointed to the chair across from her. "Sit." He sat. Mr. Whiskers regarded him from the bookshelf, tail twitching. Even the cat could feel the tension. "Start from the beginning. The real beginning. Not the elevator. Before that. Why were you in my building?" "I live here." "How long?" 47 years. I own the building." "You own the—" "Of course you do." "Okay, and the elevator breaking down?" "A genuine mechanical failure. I did not engineer it." "But you were glad it happened." He hesitated. "I was not displeased." She almost smiled. Almost. "Your laws didn't stop those things in the alley." "You're right," he said. "I was afraid. I told myself it was duty or law or protection. But the truth is that I was afraid you would look at me the way I have been looked at for 8 centuries, as a thing, not a person. And you were the first one who ever looked at me like I was just a man." "You idiot," she said softly. "You magnificent, overdressed, 800-year-old idiot." "I have been called worse, usually in Latin." "Here's the thing. I'm angry. I'm still angry. You lied to me for months. You let me cook you pasta. Garlic pasta, Cassian. I made garlic pasta for a vampire. The garlic is actually not the point. She held up a hand. The point is that you didn't trust me. And trust is the thing for me. It's the whole thing. I don't care that you're a vampire. I don't care that you're 800 years old. I care that you looked me in the eye every single day and chose not to tell me who you were. He absorbed this. It was the simplest and most devastating critique he had ever received. Just a woman telling him that she had offered him everything, and he had given her a performance. I understand, he said, and I cannot undo it. No, you can't. The silence sat between them, heavy with the weight of what came next. But, Mira said, and the word was a door opening. You stood in my alley at 2 a.m. with a torn coat and a face that was actively regenerating, and you looked up at my window like you were watching the last good thing in the world. And when I called, you didn't make an excuse. You said yes. They were there because of you. You told me the truth. It was overdue. By about 4 months, yeah. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me everything. Not the curated version, everything. The court, the politics, the laws, the danger, all of it. And then I'm going to decide, with full information, whether I want to be in this. Because you don't get to make that decision for me. Not now, not ever. She held his gaze, and he saw it, the fear she'd been hiding. Not fear of him, fear of wanting something this impossible. She was afraid, and she was choosing to stay in the room anyway. That, he understood, was the bravest thing he had ever witnessed. Everything, he agreed. He talked until dawn. He told her about the shadow courts, the hierarchy, the feeding territories. He told her about Alistair, and Seraphina, and the conclave. He told her about the centuries of loneliness that had preceded her, the slow erosion of meaning, the way time becomes a prison when there is nothing in it worth marking. She listened the way she always listened, completely, with her whole attention, her head tilted slightly, her eyes seeing everything. When he finished, the first gray light of dawn was seeping around the edges of her curtains. He moved instinctively away from the window. She noticed. The sun, she said, not a question. It is uncomfortable. In direct exposure, it is lethal. She got up, walked to the window, and closed the curtains fully. A small, practical act. An act of care so simple and so specific that it broke something in him. Not the dramatic, shattering kind of breaking, but the quiet kind, the kind that lets the light in. Thank you, he said. She sat back down. She was quiet for a long moment. Okay, she said. I'm in. You are in. I'm in. This is insane, and I'll probably regret it, and I don't understand half of what you just told me, and your political system sounds like a really dysfunctional homeowners association. But I'm in. Why? Because you sat on a dirty floor for me. Because you compared my ex-boyfriend to a failed Germanic princeling, and it was the funniest thing anyone has ever said. Because you stood in my alley in a ruined coat and looked at my window like it was the only light in the world. And because when I asked you to tell me the truth, you did. She reached across the space between them and put her hand on his. His cold hand. Her warm one. But this time, neither of them pulled away. We figure it out, she said. Together. Chapter 5. The Renovation. The months that followed were a strange, exhilarating education. Mira met Alistair, who greeted her with the rigid formality of a man who had been preparing for this moment for 500 years and still wasn't ready. Miss Mira, he said, bowing from the waist. His Majesty speaks very highly of you. He does? He burned the council agenda. I have chosen to interpret this as affection. She met the court. Leo, a young guard barely 2 centuries old, became her unofficial guide. Just don't make eye contact with Seraphina, he warned. She's been planning your elimination since Tuesday, or your humiliation. Honestly, with her, it's hard to tell the difference. Serafina, magnificent and furious, cornered Mira at the first formal event Cassian brought her to, a reception in the penthouse, all candlelight and cold blood in crystal glasses. "You are a footnote," Serafina said, her voice like silk over a blade. "A mortal footnote in an immortal story. Do you honestly believe you matter?" Mira took a sip of the very nice wine someone had thoughtfully provided for the one human in the room. "You know what I do for a living? I restore old buildings. And the thing about old buildings is, everyone assumes the original structure is the important part. But it's not. It's the renovations, the changes, the additions, the things people added because the building needed to grow. The original is beautiful, sure, but it's the new work that keeps it standing." She smiled sweetly. "I'm the renovation, Serafina. And you're the vinyl siding someone is going to peel off eventually." Cassian, who had been hovering nearby in case of emergency, felt the now familiar warmth in his chest. She didn't need his protection. She never had. She fought with a builder's vocabulary and a historian's precision, and she was devastating. They fell into a life together. It was not a normal life by any measure, but it was theirs. She worked during the day, he emerged at dusk. They would meet in the in-between hours, twilight, the time that belonged to neither of them fully, and therefore to both. "You guys have been having the same argument about territorial boundaries for 600 years?" she asked one evening, reading through court documents. "Have you considered a spreadsheet?" He went with her to a flea market on a Saturday afternoon. Sunglasses, hat, enough sunscreen to coat a small building. Alistair trailing behind with an emergency umbrella, and watched her haggle over a box of antique door hardware with the focused intensity of a general planning a campaign. She got the dealer down by 40%. Cassian was more impressed than he had been by most military victories. He adjusted his tie one evening before a court function. Or tried to. He stood before the mirror in his dressing room and saw, as always, nothing. The empty glass where his reflection should have been, the familiar absence that he had stopped noticing centuries ago. Mira appeared behind him, her reflection visible, his not. She reached around him and adjusted the knot. "A little to the left," she said. "My left." "You are my mirror," he said. "Yeah," she said, meeting his absent gaze in the glass. "I know." A year passed. Then two. The mortal calendar, which had always been a background hum in Cassian's existence, suddenly mattered. Every birthday of hers was a marker. Every season that turned was a page torn from a book that he could not stop reading and could not bear to finish. It was Mira who broke the silence. Because it was always Mira who broke the silence. They were on his balcony, the city spread below them, the sky doing that thing it does in late autumn when the light turns everything amber and gold. She was wearing one of his absurdly expensive sweaters. She had stolen it months ago, and he had not asked for it back. "I've been thinking," she said. A dangerous pastime. "I've been thinking about buildings. When I restore a building, there's a decision point. You can preserve it exactly as it was, keep the original materials, the original structure, freeze it in time. Museums do that. It's beautiful, but it's dead. Nobody lives in it. It's just a monument to what it used to be." She paused. He waited. "Or you can adapt it. Keep the bones, keep the soul, but let it change. New systems, new materials, new life. It's not the same building anymore, strictly speaking, but it's alive. People live in it. It has a future, not just a past." She turned to look at him. Her eyes were clear, steady, without fear. "I want a future, Cassian, not just a past." "This is not a small thing," he said carefully. "It is not reversible. The life you have now, the sun, the food, the aging, the ordinary human days, you would lose all of it. It is not a renovation, Mira. It is a demolition and a rebuild." "I know," You would outlive everyone you know, your friends, your family. That weight, I know what it is. I have carried it for 800 years. It does not get lighter. I know that too. She took his hand. Cold and warm, the familiar contrast. But here's what you don't know, because you've never had it. It's lighter when you carry it with someone. He looked at her. This woman who had offered him a gummy bear in a broken elevator, who had cooked him garlic pasta, who had kicked him out and let him back in, who had called Serafina vinyl siding to her face, who had closed his curtains against the dawn with the quiet competence of someone who had decided, fully and completely, to love an impossible thing. Are you certain? He asked. I'm an architectural historian, Cassian. I don't make decisions without studying the blueprints. I've studied these blueprints. She smiled, that same smile, the one from the elevator, from the hallway, from every moment that had brought them to this balcony. I choose the renovation, she said. The turning was quiet, not the dramatic Gothic spectacle of legend. No thunderstorms, no ancient rituals in candlelit crypts, no chanting in dead languages. It happened in their apartment, because it was their apartment now. 7B and the penthouse combined into something that was neither his space nor hers, but theirs. On a Tuesday, because the universe still had its fondness for mundane timing. Alistair prepared the room. Clean linens, blackout curtains, a thermos of warmed blood for afterward, her first, which she would need. He moved through the preparations with the efficiency of a man who had done this before, but his hands trembled slightly, a betrayal of emotion he would deny if asked. Cassian sat beside her on the bed. She was calm, calmer than him, which was infuriating and completely in character. Any last words as immortal? He asked, trying for lightness and landing somewhere near, terrified. Yeah, I packed gummy bears for after. They're in the nightstand. I don't know if I'll still be able to eat them, but if I can, I want them to be the first thing. Gummy bears may not. Cassian, let me have this. He leaned in and kissed her forehead, then her temple, then the place where her pulse beat warm and alive for the last time. I love you, he said. I know, she said. I've known since the elevator. You sat on that floor like it was killing you, and you stayed anyway. That's love. Everything else is just details. She closed her eyes. He held her through the change, through the pain which was real and which he could not take from her, through the silence that followed, which was different from sleep and different from death and different from anything she had experienced before, through the long, still hours of the night until the change was complete and she opened her eyes and they were new. Her first word, with a voice that was hers but changed, deeper, richer, carrying an undertone that hadn't been there before, was, "Huh. How do you feel?" he asked. She held up her hand, turned it over, studied it with the analytical precision of a woman who had spent her life reading the details of things. Different. Not bad, just different. She paused. Everything is very loud. That will settle. And I can hear Mr. Whisker's heartbeat from here. She looked at the cat, who was sitting on the dresser, tail twitching, staring at her with an expression of deep suspicion. He knows. Cats always know. She sat up. She flexed her hands. She looked at the mirror on the closet door and saw nothing. An empty bed, a cat on a dresser, no reflection. Oh, she said quietly. That's weird. You adjust. No, she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. I mean, who's going to fix your tie now? He stared at her. She stared back. And then they were both laughing, his rusty, unused laugh, and her new one, which was brighter and stranger and exactly, unmistakably, hers. 3 weeks later, Mira stood in the lobby of their building, studying the elevator. The old one, car number 3, the one with the groaning cables and the grinding drive sheave and the amber emergency lights that had started everything. Cassian found her there, running her fingers along the door frame. She had the look she got when she was reading a building, that focused, reverent attention to detail. "They're replacing it next month," she said. "The new management company finally approved the upgrade." "I could delay the order." "You own the management company, don't you?" "I own several management companies. This one specifically, yes." She turned to look at him. Her eyes, which were darker now, with that same strange luminous depth that his held, crinkled at the corners when she smiled. Some things didn't change. "Keep it," she said. "This one. Don't replace it. It is a safety hazard. It's where we started. You don't demolish that." He looked at the elevator, the dented metal doors, the scratched panel, the button for the alarm bell that produced a sound of absolutely no urgency. A monument to a mechanical failure that had, against all probability, produced the only thing in 8 centuries that had made him feel alive. "I'll have it maintained," he said. "Perpetually. It will function just well enough to be unreliable." "Perfect." She took his hand, cold and cold now. The same temperature, no more contrast, but the fit was the same. "We can get stuck in it together." "Eternally," he said. Miles away, in the penthouse study, Alistair sighed as he approved a new, recurring line item in the household budget. It was an order for a weekly delivery of 5 pounds of assorted gummy bears. She could, it turned out, still eat them. The fact that they tasted different now, sharper, more chemical, the artificial flavors registering as individual compounds rather than a cheerful blur of sweetness, did not deter her. If anything, she found it more interesting. Alistair categorized the expense under royal provisions. He paused, then added a subnotation. Recurring. Indefinitely. It was, he supposed, the price of forever.